One of the things that I want to describe to you is how you determine how upset you should be when something anomalous happens. Because it's really hard to figure out, right? So, because, well, you see this often, especially if you're unsophisticated in dispute settlement with an intimate partner. Every little bump in the relationship is the potential dissolution of the entire relationship. That's actually why people get married, you know, just so you know. Because this is built into marital vows. I'm not leaving, ever, no matter what. It's like, okay, well, that definitely puts a boundary around our arguments, right? Because I can't say every time you manifest one of your flaws, which you're likely to do just as often as me, well, enough of this. It's like, that's horrible, man. If your whole life is, well, every time you get out of line, I'm out of here. It's like, how the hell are you? First of all, you're not going to admit to ever doing anything wrong. Second, you're going to be on your, you're like a scared cat the entire relationship because, well, who knows, it could just come to an end at any moment. It's like, you know, people say, well, if the possibility of divorce is open, it makes you free. It's like, yeah, that's what you want. You want to be free, eh? Really? Really? So you can't predict anything. That's what you're after. It's a vow. And it says, look, I know that you're trouble. Me too. So we won't leave, no matter what happens. Well, that's a hell of a vow, but that's why it's a vow, right? That's why you take it in front of a bunch of people. That's why it's supposed to be a sacred act. It's like, what's the alternative? What's the alternative? Everything is mutable and changeable at any moment. Well, go ahead, you live your life like that and see what you're like when you're 50. Jesus, it's dismal. 2 or 3 divorces, your family's fragmented, you've got no continuity of narrative. And it's not good for the kids, not by any stretch of the imagination. And so it's a form of voluntary enslavement, I suppose, but it's also equivalent to the adoption of a responsibility. And there's more to it than that. If you can't run away, then you can solve your problems. Because it might be, okay, well, I'm stuck with you. So how about we fix things? Because the alternative is we're going to be in a boxing match for the next 40 years. That's the alternative. So, and you think you're going to fix problems without something like that hanging over your head? There isn't a chance. You'll just avoid them because that's what people do. It's really hard to solve problems, especially in a relationship. We're having a fight and I find out that it's, you know, because you were abused by your uncle when you were 5 or some goddamn thing. You know, it's like, it's very frequent that that sort of thing happens. There's your partner is, you know, manifesting some weird anomalous behavior. You just can't make heads or tails of it. It doesn't seem related to what you're doing at all. They don't want to talk about it. And so as soon as you bring it up, they get mad. And then you bring it up again, they even get madder and they tell you that they're not going to talk about that or they're going to leave. And so maybe you're really, really persistent because you're kind of a son of a bitch, and then they break down and cry, you know, and then they have this horrible memory that comes flooding forward that's completely, you don't know what to do with it, and then you have to sort it out. It's like, you think you're going to do that unless there's a good reason? You have to know, we better sort this out or we're going to be carrying it around for the next 40 years. That maybe is enough motivation so you'll actually try hard to solve a problem. It's a lot easier to say, well, sorry, we're not going there. But then, good, you'll have it every day, every goddamn day for the rest of your life. You kind of want to tangle your life together with someone, you know, because you have someone to, well, it's like 2 ropes that are tangled together. It's stronger, especially during times of weakness. And you have 2 brains instead of 1. And that actually turns out to be really helpful when things are complicated. And it builds a solidity into your life and a reality into your life to have someone who's along with you on this very long voyage. And so I think that deepens your life in a way that isn't really possible with fragmentary relationships as a single person.
Definitely.
And then there's more to it than that. It's like, I think of wrestling. There's this scene in the Old Testament where Jacob wrestles with an angel. He's wrestling with God, actually, which is quite an interesting, that's what Israel means, right? Wrestling with God. Yeah, that just blew me away when I learned it. It's so
is that true?
The true people of Israel are those who wrestle with God.
Yeah,
it's not believe exactly. It's a whole different thing, man. It's a whole different thing.
Isn't it like fear from God? What it means? That's what I thought.
Well, from the work I did in the last couple of months looking at this, and I looked into it quite deeply, it does mean wrestling, essentially, and it does derive from that scene in the Old Testament where Jacob wrestles with God. That's when he gets the name Israel. And his hip is dislocated, right? Permanently. He has a permanent limp after that. It's no joke. But I think of marriage the same way. Like people think, well, they lived happily ever after. It's like, that's not what you want in a marriage.
Yeah.
You want someone to contend with, you know, because you learn through that wrestling, you know, like you learn where you're an idiot and where you should stop being and vice versa. So that's the spiritual aspect of marriage. It's the fact that you have to contend with someone under all sorts of circumstances, theoretically is what would you say? It's a manner of promoting psychological, or you could say spiritual growth. And it's genuine. You know, that's why marriage is a sacrament in most human communities, right? It's stamped both by the state and by the sacred authorities, because it's not just a physiological union. That's what animals do. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with the physiological union, but it has to be placed in the context of everything else a human being is. And I do think it's dreadful for people not to have that. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. It's like, yeah. The other thing about marriage, this is really worth knowing too, is that I learned this in part from reading Jung. It's like, what do you do when you get married? That's easy. You take someone who's just as useless and horrible as you are, and then you shackle yourself to them. And then you say, we're not running away, no matter what happens. Yeah, well, that's perfect, because then you don't get to run away. And the thing is like, if you can run away, you can't tell each other the truth. Because if you tell someone the truth about you and they don't run away, they weren't listening. And so if you don't have someone around that can't run away, then you can't tell them the truth. And so that's part of the purpose of the marriage. It's like, okay, I'll bet on you, you bet on me. It's a losing bet, we both know that. But given our current circumstances, we're unlikely to find anyone better. That's for sure. You know, there's two things that come off of that. One is, you know, people are waiting around to find Mr. or Mrs. Right. It's like, here's something to think about, man, to put yourself on your feet right. If you went to a party and you found Mr. Right, and he looked at you and didn't run away screaming, that would indicate that he wasn't Mr. Right at all, right? It's like the old Nietzschean joke, if someone loves you, that should immediately disenchant you with them. Right. Or it's the Woody Allen joke, I'd never belong to a club that would take me as a member. So that's a very interesting thing to think about. And so you're going to shackle yourself to someone who's just as imperfect as you are. And then the issue is you might be in a situation where you can actually negotiate, because you might think, well, there's some things about you that aren't going so right, and there's some things about me that aren't going so right, and we're bloody well stuck with the consequences for the next 50 years. So we can either straighten this out, or we can suffer through it for the next 5 decades. And you know, people are of the sort that without that degree of seriousness, those problems will not be solved. You'll leave things unnamed, because there's always an out. It's the same idea. Life is suffering. Right. Indisputable. What do you do about that? You voluntarily accept it, and then strive to overcome the suffering that's a consequence of that. And you do that for you, and you do that in a way that makes it better for other people. And then that works. And one question might be, well, how well does it work? And the answer is, the only way that you can find out is by trying it. That's it. That's the existential element of it. The proof is to be derived by the incarnation of the attitude in your own life. No one can tell you how it will work for you. It's the thing that your destiny is to discover that. And you have to make the decisions to begin with. It's like, because you can't do this without commitment. You have to commit to it first. That's the act of faith that Kierkegaard was so insistent upon. You have to say, I'm going to act as if being is good. I'm going to act as if truth is the pathway to enlightenment. I'm going to act as if I should pursue the deepest meaning possible in my life. And there's reasons to do none of those. They're real reasons. So it's really a decision. But you can't find out what the consequence of the decision is unless you make the decision. I think the same thing happens when you get married, by the way. Is that if you think you might leave, you're not married. And then you think, well, the marriage didn't succeed. It's like, well, maybe you were never married. because the rule is you don't get to leave. And there's a reason for that rule. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't situations where there should be exceptions made for that. That's not the point. The point is that there's some games you don't get to play unless you're all in. And the other thing that's so interesting about being alive is that you're all in. No matter what you do, you're all in. This is going to kill you. So I think you might as well play the most magnificent game you can. You might think, how stupid is it to shackle yourself to someone? It's like, it's stupid, man. There's no doubt about that. But compared to the alternatives, it's pretty damn good. Because without that shackling, there are things you will never, ever learn. Because you'll avoid them. You can always leave. And if you can leave, then you don't have to tell each other the truth. It's as simple as that, because you can just leave. And then you don't have anyone you can tell the truth to.